Hey guys, it's Adam from Premium Poker Tools, and in this video I'm going to study a hand using this Should You Bluff page. So I'm going to kind of demonstrate how you can use this page to study. So here's the hand that I'm going to go over. So kind of a typical-ish spot. Um, we open 4-3 suited, 4-3 of hearts from the cutoff, and we get called by the small blind, and we're heads up going to the flop. And the flop comes ace of clubs, eight of spades, two of diamonds. And we're faced with a decision of whether or not we should Cbet bluff here. So I think a lot of people um, don't like to bluff when there's an ace because they think to themselves, people like to call with a lot of aces. A lot of the hands that they play have aces. Like the small blind could be calling with like ace three offsuit, but they're probably not calling with like queen three offsuit or king three offsuit even. So people's ranges are very ace heavy. So I think that people see an ace and they're a little afraid. They don't want to, they think that their opponent has a lot of pairs of aces and they're not going to be folding that. So let's back off and let's not bluff them. But here, I'd like to kind of study that a little bit more deeply. So let's use this tool to study. So we're considering bluffing the flop. We're facing one opponent. We have four of hearts, three of hearts. And so what do we think our opponent's range is after the pre-flop action's finished? So when they call us from the small blind, what do we think their calling range is? So I'm going to say that we're playing like a small stakes game. They're, relatively wide. Not too wide, but, let's add in some suited, connected stuff. 9-7, 10-7. Let's say that they're playing all their aces, and let's kind of go with the line of thinking that I had before where they're very ace heavy. So, you know, they're not playing any offsuit like king 9 off, but they are going to play like ace 2 off. So let's kind of give them the benefit of the doubt and say that they're very ace heavy. And let's just remove some of this stuff because we're going to assume that they're going to 3-bet with ace king, aces, kings, and queens. In theory, they could be 3-betting wider, but let's say it's a small stakes game where people are very passive and they don't 3-bet very often. So this is the range we have entering the flop. And now we're going to enter the flop card. So the flop comes ace of clubs, eight of spades, two of diamonds. So before we move on, let's talk about this flop. So we have 4-3. Actually, I didn't even mean for this to happen, but we do have a gut shot. I was going to say there's basically no way we could win this hand other than getting a fold because we have 4 high and we don't have any flush draws. We do have a gut shot, but let's kind of ignore that fact for now. So we're in a spot where we're going to need to bluff to win the pot. And we want to know whether we can profitably bluff or whether we should kind of just give up. Okay, so what bluff size do we want to explore? So let's say that we want to try a 2/3 pot bet. We think half pot is small enough where they might kind of make a crying call with whatever. Let's say we want to try a 2/3 pot bluff. So I'm going to skip this section for now. I'm going to come back to it. And let's move on to step 7. And let's ask ourselves, what do we think that they're going to continue with versus the 2/3 pot bluff? So I'm going to maximize this screen here. So what I want to do is I want to check off the hands that I think that they're going to call with. And so far this is looking pretty good. I think they're continuing with their sets. Obviously, they're 2 pairs. I'm going to say that they continue with all of their top pair hands. Pocket pairs under top pairs, let's say that they call with jacks, 10s, 9s, 8s, or jacks, 10s, and 9s. And let's say that they're going to give up with their weak stuff. So they're not going to call with pocket fours. They see the ace, they think we hit it. They don't want to mess around with these sorts of hands. These are kind of, they're set minding. If they hit their set, they continue. If not, they get out of the way. So here we're saying that they're calling with all of their top pairs, and we can see like this range is very ace heavy. There's a ton of top pair hands, but I want to ask the question: can we bluff them profitably? Well, we can see that our 2/3 pot bluff will be immediately profitable. So what that means is that even if we never hit one of our outs, like we have a gut shot, even if we never hit one of our outs, even if we never get a fold on a future street when there's like a scare card or something, um, even if we lose the hand immediately, once they call us, we throw in our cards and they win the pot. Even if we have no future, anything going for us in the future, we're still gonna profit here because we only need our bluff to work 40% of the time, but this bluff is gonna work about 50 or 51% of the time. So this is an auto profit situation right here. And even if we throw in like weak pairs, we're still auto profiting here. Like even if they're calling with their pocket threes or whatever, we're still getting folds 43% of the time when we only need them 40% of the time. So, and they might not even be calling with their weak pairs. So on a board like this, what I want to my lesson here is don't be so scared of the ace. Even though the ace looks very scary, they're only going to have top pair about, let's see, about 31% of the time. So it looks like it's a huge, huge, huge part of their range, but they're only going to have their top pair 31% of the time. And even if we add in 3 of a kind and 2 pair, they're only going to hit this board hard less than 40% of the time. And this is kind of in the scenario where their pre-flop range is very ace heavy. If we said that it's not as ace heavy, we would be in even better shape. So one of the things I wanted to get across is that don't be afraid of the ace. It's not that big of a part of their range where you need to be so scared of it. You can still probably bluff them profitably. Yeah, so the other thing that I want to point out is that this board is very dry. There's not a lot of draws that they can have. So if you see in this section, like they'll have a gut shot 1% of the time, but there's no flush draws, there's no straight draws or anything like that. So the board is very dry. So that's something that we have going for us. If there were more flush draws and straight draws possible, and they're going to continue with that, we wouldn't be in as good shape. But because the board is dry, we're in pretty good shape. So when you have a board that's dry, even if it has an ace, you're in good shape. It's possible if you think that your opponent is floating you pretty wide, then we have a different scenario. If they're going to call you with 10-9 and see what you do on the turn, your flop bet isn't going to be automatically profitable. Then we kind of have to look at things more closely. But if you're against one of these players who are kind of fit or folds, they make a hand, they play it. If they don't make a hand, they get out of the way. You can bluff them profitably on these kinds of boards. So that's kind of the lesson that I wanted to kind of impart in this video. So to take things a little bit further, I want to really show you that to use this tool, we can play around with the assumptions we made. So let's see what happens if they're not as wide pre-flop and they're not even that ace heavy. So let's remove some of this. Let's remove some of their weaker things pre-flop. Let's Jack 10, Queen 10. It's a little weak. So let's say that they're more on like a 20% range pre-flop. Well, whenever we adjust one step, it's going to change the other steps. So now it looks like if they're on a little bit of a tighter range, we're not in quite as good of a shape. So now it's a little bit close. We have 40% equity. Sorry, we have 40.55% fold equity, and we need 40%. So we're only a little bit more than what we would need to auto profit. But if they're the kind of player that's playing more tightly pre-flop, they might not. They might be the kind of player that folds their weak pairs. They might not want to play with pocket fours here. So yeah, if we remove the weak pairs, then now we're back at our plus 10 or 11%. And another thing is, even if they are playing their weak pairs, we still have some equity. We do have our gut shot. I said to ignore that fact, but we do have our gut shot. And what you can do is you can scroll down and say, instead of needing 40%, we need maybe 35%. We're going to drop it down a little bit. And you can use this break-even percentage tool to see how much you really could drop it down. But I'm just going to drop it down by 5%. So now instead of 40%, it's 35%. So we've got a little bit of a comfortable edge here. And this is kind of in the conservative scenario where they're a little bit more tight pre-flop, which isn't common in small stakes games. In small stakes games, people are very loose. And we're also kind of being conservative and saying that they're going to call with their weak pairs. So even in these kind of worst case scenario situations, we have a pretty profitable Cbet bluff. So again, don't be afraid of the ace on the flop. When you have a dry board like this, you can usually Cbet pretty profitably. And again, that's assuming that your opponent is one of these fit or fold kind of players who play when they have a hand and get out of the way when they don't. If you're against kind of a more creative player who's going to float you on the flop, then it's a different story. So I wanted to show you that you can adjust all of these assumptions. Let's take a quick look at this right here. So this is showing how you're doing against different ranges that they're continuing with. So we've seen a lot of these numbers before. So if they're continuing with weak pair and better, we only have 40.55% fold equity. So we're only doing a little bit better than what we need. If they're continuing with middle pair or better, so they're folding their weak pairs, now we're doing much better. Now we're plus 16%, so that's pretty great. If they're folding their middle pairs and they're only continuing with pocket pairs under top pair and better, even better. If they are more of a nitty player who only continues with top pair or better, like now we're doing fantastic. So that's what this table right here is doing. It lets you kind of zoom out and ask these questions. So that's pretty useful. I'm not going to go through this because the video is getting long, but you can click these flop cards and change them and say what happens if it's like a 4 or a 5 or a 7. I don't know. A 7 is going to change things because that's going to give more straight draws. But you can play around and see how things change on different boards. So I'll leave that to you to play around. I just want to kind of end the video by thinking about what do we do on the next street. So we're trying to bluff our opponent. Let's say we bet the flop and we get a call. Can we maybe try to push them off their hands on the turn? So let's go back to kind of the more standard assumptions. Let's assume they're not continuing with their weak pairs, but they are continuing with their middle pairs on the flop. Okay, so this is what we're assuming on the flop, how they're going to continue. On the turn, let's say the turn comes, I don't know, a 6. So what could we do on the turn? I'm going to scroll past this. So let's just assume they're continuing with all their top pairs, all their aces. Let's say at this point they're going to fold their pocket jacks, tens, and nines. They're going to fold any second pair hands like a eight, whatever eights they have. Um, so you can see if they're continuing with all their top pairs and their flush draws, we're not in good shape. I think, yeah, even if you take away the flush draws, because the only flush draws are the aces, if they're just continuing with any top pair, you know, they're continuing 75% of the time. So that's not good for us. So on these kinds of boards where they start off very dry, once we get a call on the flop, we can assume that they're on a pretty strong range, and we probably don't want to follow up with another bluff on the turn because the flop call indicates that they're strong. So we probably want to give up at that point. The only thing to consider there is if you think you can get a fold by the river. So if you think that, the flop, they have a lot of weak aces in their range, and they'll call with their weak aces on the turn, but you think that by the river, they're going to release them. So that's something that you can spend some time exploring. My kind of feeling about that is that a lot of smaller stakes, like less experienced players, are very attached to their like top pairs, and they don't like to fold them. I know Ed Miller gives the advice to, when you barrel, your goal is to get them off of their weak stuff. It's not to like bully them off of their strong stuff that they like. And a lot of weaker players, they like their pairs of aces. They're not looking to fold. So that's something that you can study. I mean, maybe it's wrong. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on that, but that's kind of my perspective. So yeah, this video has been kind of an overview of this kind of hand or situation where we have a dry board with an ace on it. How do we approach it when we're looking to bluff our opponent? And my kind of feeling is that you can bluff them pretty profitably on the flop, but then once you get called, it's probably good to give up. So let me know what you guys think. Any questions or anything, my email is contact@premiumpokertools.com. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll talk to you later.